an illegal coalition that hit in rural Raqqa during the past couple of days. They've been hitting so many times, and they've killed tens of civilians with no real military target of the Islamic State. The village that was hit by the American coalition is not a frontline village, and is not a village where missiles are being hit by the Islamic State towards the Kurdish forces or towards the coalition.
I believe that the United States is acting based on sheer use of force without any consideration to civilian lives. And I believe that these actions are sporadic, unorganized, and random, and this makes the United States very unpredictable, and the consequences of its actions also unpredictable. I believe that this could lead to an escalation of violence, and this would discredit the international community at a time when terrorism is using the failure of the Western or the international community to act in a justifiable and lawful manner regarding crises, whether in the Middle East or elsewhere in the world.
The US says it's prepared now for more strikes against Syria after firing 59 missiles at one of the country's key air bases yesterday. Valley's attack killed 9 civilians and 5 Syrian soldiers. Moscow's described the strike as aggression against a sovereign state and has warned of grave consequences now for the Middle East.
Our military destroyed the airfield from which this week's chemical strike took place. We were fully justified in doing so.
We see it as a violation of international law and as an act of aggression.
Beyond any doubt that the Syrian regime has used chemical weapons against its own people multiple times.
We said, show us the evidence. Specialists will decide whether it's true or not.
Strengthening Assad will only lead to more murders.
Once again, the Syrian army is and continues to be the main anti-terrorist force.
Washington took action after Tuesday's chemical strike in Syria's Idlib province. The incident was immediately blamed on Assad forces. The UN chemical weapons watchdog is now on a fact-finding mission there, and Russia's calling for a full investigation. Bolivia's envoy to the UN pointed out, meantime, that the situation playing out in Syria right now is really similar to how the US started the invasion of Iraq.
I believe that we must remember these pictures. In this very hall, we were told that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and this was the motivation for the invasion. It launched a series of atrocities in the region. Would we be talking about ISIL and attacks in various parts of the world if this illegal invasion didn't take place?
Indeed, critics have drawn comparisons between Colin Powell in 2003 and the Security Council meeting last Wednesday, where Nikki Haley showed pictures of children as evidence of the chemical attack. Our TJ Petrenko looks next at what's changed between then and now.
Old school intervention versus new school intervention. Here we go. What did it take to get started in Iraq some 15 years ago? At least a number of formalities, like months of putting intel reports together, presenting evidence, which led to a high degree of confidence that Iraq was running a program of weapons of mass destruction, like Colin Powell's now iconic show, and everything he had to say at the UN Security Council.
Less than a teaspoon of dry anthrax, a little bit about this amount. This is just about the amount of a teaspoon. Iraq declared 8,500 liters of anthrax.
I'm sure you know it then turned out this Saddam and his WMD story was a lie. But I'm not trying to make that point again. At least they tried to justify their case to the world. My point is George Bush's order to wipe out the Saddam Hussein regime required all-out diplomatic battles on all fronts. But that was so 2003. It's 2017, folks. No time to be so boringly formal. Such slow coaches. Just 72 hours later, and American Tomahawks hit Syria. Okay, fair enough. For a minute, it looked like Washington was playing old school. they did wait for a Security Council session to take place, where it was made abundantly clear that most members had already made up their minds about who is to blame for the chemical disaster in Syria.
We have every indication that this was a sustained attack using aircraft over a number of hours.
An international investigation hasn't even kicked off yet, and the UN itself cannot confirm the means of the attack.
Reports have stated that the attack was carried out through an airstrike on a residential area. However, the means of delivery of the alleged attack cannot be definitely confirmed at this stage.
But who cares? 3 days are enough to draw your own conclusions with a high degree of confidence.
Our intelligence community, in cooperation with our friends and partners and allies around the world, collaborated to determine with a very high degree of confidence precisely where the location originated.
Congressional approval, Mr. Trump knows what that is, and UN resolutions simply no longer matter, according to the new school way of doing things.
Andrew Farmer spoke with British MP Crispin Blunt. He's chairman of the UK Foreign Affairs Select Committee about the evidence, or rather lack of it right now, against the Syrian government.
We have the evidence of 80 dead people on the ground where there has now been post-mortems to establish they did actually die of nerve agent, and certainly their symptoms are completely
consistent. But where's the evidence of who did it, Crispin?
Nerve agent poisoning. Well, they get this evidence is going to obviously have to be
what evidence?
What
have they provided?
But what you couldn't have is what you couldn't then have. Well, the evidence is there on the ground that there was a chemical weapons strike.
Yeah, but who did it?
Of some kind. The case that was the case that the Americans are saying without doubt it was done by the Syrian.
So why don't they provide the evidence?
There is no evidence. There is no evidence coming back on. Well, the evidence is there on the ground. The people in the forms of the casualties, and the use of chemical weapons is immensely serious. Now, I accept that it seems very strange that the Syrian Air Force would use these weapons at this time, given the reaction that's going to happen. And indeed, Syria shouldn't have any chemical weapons. They were meant to have been disarmed in 2013. People like me voted against the action in 2013 because it wasn't going to achieve the objective of disarming Syria. The Russians oversaw the disarmament of Syria, and now we see the Syrian armed forces using chemical weapons.
Hang on,
but you are anticipating that there would be no response.
They deny using those chemical weapons, and the UN did actually say that they believe that Syria had complied and got rid of their chemical weapons. But we do know that areas where the UN couldn't actually carry out their research during that time were areas held by the rebels. And the accusation now is this could have been actually a Syrian attack by the rebels. I mean, the point I'm trying to make, Crispin, is that there are lots of counter-arguments, and unilateral action is being taken, and it doesn't seem to be... There doesn't seem to be a comprehensive take on exactly what has happened. There are many arguments and counter-arguments. Surely we should wait until we know exactly what has happened before taking action.
What we're relying on here is the Americans being 100% certain of the
Can we really trust them?
Attack. And if they and they have taken that responsibility. Now, there of course then will be further investigations, no doubt taking many weeks of research into this as people no doubt try to see if whether there is any evidence at all to support the Syrian and Russian claims.
Meantime, President Trump's order to target the Syrian airbase sparked an anti-war rally in London and dozens of protests across the United States.
Today we say a war no more.
We voted for him because he promised that he's not gonna be the policeman for the world. He's not gonna go against the Syrian army. He's gonna make America great again, and he's gonna stay within America.
This is one more war based on a total lie.
I think it just risks escalating a conflict in which there really isn't a solution that we seem to be aiming for.
Trump doesn't give a damn about the children of Syria.
And I just want to say that this rally is one of actually over 40 around the country.
My friends in Syria that I talk to every day, they don't want war. They never asked to be killed, tortured, or murdered.
Donald Trump's move seems to have won over much of the mainstream media, though, but nonetheless, it's a significant shift from what he promised during his presidential campaign, as Caleb Mopin reports.
Remember when Donald Trump was running for president? All those bold statements?
For too long, we've been moving from one reckless intervention to another.
In Libya, Syria, Iraq, Iran, this destructive cycle, bad decisions.
We cannot be the policemen of the world.
America first. America first.
Well, now Donald Trump has carried out the USA's first direct strike against the Syrian government. And in doing so, he's won over the mainstream media, the so-called fake news he despised.
Overnight retaliation from his Florida estate of passionate President Trump.
We see these beautiful pictures at night. I am tempted to quote the great Leonard Cohen, I'm guided by the beauty of our weapons.
What changed last night?
I think Donald Trump became President of the United States.
It's not just the mainstream media. Remember his old arch rival, Crooked Hillary? Well, Hillary Clinton was on TV, and she called for a strike against the air base just hours before it happened.
Assad had an air force, and that air force is the cause of most of the civilian deaths. We should have and still should take out his airfields.
John McCain and Lindsey Graham, some of his staunchest opponents within the Republican Party, they're now singing his praises.
I think it's a good beginning. It sends a tremendously important signal. I'm glad the president did it.
I want to applaud the president for taking action. It was justified. It was necessary.
It was the right move. First of all, it was legal.
With many of Trump's staunchest opponents now on his side, where does that leave his loyal supporters? What do they think of his sudden conversion to aggressive military intervention?
Those who wanted us meddling in the Middle East voted for other candidates.
I guess Trump wasn't Putin's puppet after all. He was just another deep state neocon puppet. I'm officially off the Trump train.
Missiles flying, Rubio's happy, McCain ecstatic, Hillary's on board, a complete policy change in 48 hours.
If we go in greater force that kind of is alluded to by his UN ambassador, then I think he'll see his support, the support base, the voters, his support deteriorate even more, and the international relations will deteriorate further.
This is precisely what the deep state wanted, and Trump, as he has found out, when up against the deep state, really doesn't have any power. This is what the war industry wants. This is what the makers of the Tomahawk cruise missile wants. This is what the Pentagon wants, and this is what they got, and Trump obliged. So to the extent that he served their interests, he becomes, quote-unquote presidential.
Why did Donald Trump suddenly make peace with an establishment that he's always raged against? With a president capable of such an aggressive U-turn, it may be impossible to predict what comes next. Caleb Maupin, RT, New York.